Welcome to All About Art. My name is Alexandra, and I'm an art historian, curator, and writer. Within this podcast, topics relating to art history, cultural policy, the art sector, as well as a large range of other art-related topics will be covered. Conducting critical discussions, having entertaining exchanges, or just enjoying some relaxing chats, All About Art is where you'll find it all. Join me in exploring and developing cultural discourse. Welcome to another episode of All About Art. In this episode, I speak to Gražina Subelytė, Associate Curator at the Peggy Guggenheim Collection in Venice. Gražina curated the exhibition currently on during the Venice Biennale, which is titled Surrealism and Magic, Enchanted Modernity. In this episode, we talk about her background and how she came to curate at such a renowned organization. We delve into the intricacies and processes of curating an extensive exhibition, and we also touch on the challenges of putting together a show like this. Listen in to hear me ask Gražina about how it feels to contribute to the arts landscape during the Venice Biennale, and what advice she would give someone wanting to follow in her footsteps. I was incredibly excited to visit the Peggy Guggenheim Collection after reading Peggy's autobiography. The book focused mostly on her art collecting, and reading it made me fall back in love with the modern art of the mid-20th century that encompasses movements such as Cubism, Surrealism, and Abstract Expressionism. After reading the book, to wander through the space and see not only the amazing paintings Peggy had collected, but also the meaningful objects, such as the bed frame by American sculptor Alexander Calder, was a fantastic experience for me. The temporary exhibition that I speak about in detail with Gražina was also amazing. Honestly, with masterpieces in every room, Surrealism and Magic gave such a rich overview of the Surrealist movement, and I loved that there was a particular focus on female artists as well. I grew up loving Salvador Dalí, but now I think I love Leonor Fini a little bit more. Many thanks to the Peggy Guggenheim Collection for the collaboration, and of course to Gražina for coming on the podcast. Before I dive in, I wanted to let you lovely listeners know that All About Art is on Patreon. So if you want some behind-the-scenes content, maybe a bit of merch, the chance to get one-on-ones with me and my guests, or you're simply wanting to support this project, I would be absolutely thrilled if you decided to sign up. You can do so through the link in the show notes. I also wanted to say thank you to those who have already signed up. Your support means the world, and it makes the further production, improvement, and growth of the podcast possible. And for that, I'm incredibly grateful. And now, on to the interview. Thank you so much, Gražina, for sitting down with me today. I am just going to dive right in to the first question. I first want to talk about your background to give listeners an idea of your education and your job. You did a BA with a double major in History and Theory of Arts and Literature. You continued with an MA in Modern and Contemporary Art, and you have now completed your PhD in History of Art at the Curator. Tell me a bit more about that. Why did you study those subjects, and what led you to enter into the arts?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Alexandra, for having me. And thank you for starting with this question about my background. So I'm Lithuanian originally. I was brought up in Vilnius, the capital. And indeed, I went to do my BA in Germany, in Bremen, at the Jakobsuniversität Bremen. And I began with political sciences. And very shortly afterwards, I took some elective courses in art history and quickly realized that I had wanted to switch. But my parents at the time didn't allow me to do this. And they said, they believed that maybe sticking with politics was a slightly more safe position to be in. And I went home, talked to them, and eventually decided to double major, sort of to finish both, indeed, political sciences and then history or theory of arts, and at the time also literature, to really deepen my knowledge of all of these fields, even if in my heart of hearts I knew that I wanted to stick with art history. And at the time I did so many internships in Germany. I did at Christie's Auction House, at the Karlsruhe Zentrum für Kunst und Medien in south of Germany, so tried out a few things. links. And having had such a wonderful experience at Christie's in Berlin, I had decided to apply for the master's at Christie's Education in collaboration with Glasgow University in London. And that was my master's in modern and contemporary art. I think at the time I still thought I was interested in working for auction houses, but it just so happened that my professors at Christie's Education sent me as one of the 2 students back in 2007 to do an internship at the Peggy Guggenheim Collection. And I came here as an intern and never left. And I also did my PhD. I applied for it after several years of having been here at the museum about one of the artists that is also represented in our collection. So let's say the PhD came later, very much connected to my work here at the Peggy Guggenheim Collection.
Oh, that's absolutely amazing to hear. I also love the idea of starting off in something that has kind of not really much to do with the arts and then choosing to follow your heart and go into that. I think that that's quite inspirational because that's definitely something that we struggle with in the sector. You know, I think so many people can tell stories about how their parents are like, ooh, maybe don't go into the arts. And I think that that's something that I also try to do here with the podcast is like, hey, let's look at all the wonderful jobs and all the wonderful possibilities that there are and how we can feel so fulfilled working in the arts.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's also all about having patience because as we know in the arts, you might not be paid well in the beginning. You might have to do a bunch of internships that are perhaps for free. And of course, I had to deal with that in the beginning of my career as well. But it's all about the end goal and really what keeps you going and having the patience.
Absolutely. And for those who may not be familiar, can you tell me a bit more about the Peggy Guggenheim Collection as an institution? And I mean, you mentioned this a little bit that you started off with the internship, but how you came to work here and how that process began?
Indeed. So when we speak about the Peggy Guggenheim Collection, of course, we have to speak about Peggy Guggenheim, one of the world's greatest collectors and patrons of the arts of the 20th century. She was born in New York in 1898, and then in the beginning of the 1920s, just like many American expatriates back in the day, she went to Paris, and it's where she had met so many of the artists, intellectuals, writers that had become her friends for life. And perhaps the most important figure among them is Marcel Duchamp, the French-born artist who one could say was the father of conceptual arts. And he very and truly introduced Peggy Guggenheim to that difference between surrealism and abstraction. And throughout her life, Peggy collected works of both of these tendencies. I think there are more tendencies rather than styles. And she had 2 galleries in her lifetime. One of them was called Guggenheim June in London in the late 30s. And the second one was called Art of the Century that she had in New York from 1942 to 47. And it's truly when she launched the career of someone like Jackson Pollock and other American abstract expressionists. And in 1947, she gets invited to show her collection at the Venice Biennale of 48. And that was the first possible Biennale, because the Biennale had stopped for 6 years. And Peggy had loved Venice so much. She had visited as a child, and she also came here during her honeymoon with her first husband, Lawrence Vail, the Dada artist and writer. So she always knew she wanted to come back here. She shows her collection at the Venice Biennale in the Greek Pavilion in the 48, and then afterwards decides to make Venice her permanent home. And she lives here for the last 30 years of her life, passes away in 1979. So basically, when you talk about the Peggy Guggenheim Collection, you're also talking about the home in which she had lived. And so today, it houses still her collection, the works that she amassed throughout her life. And when you think about it, it's not a very big collection, just over 300 works of art. But we are talking about some of the world's greatest masterpieces of classical modernism, beginning with Cubism, through early European abstraction, Surrealism, early American abstract expressionism, and Italian art of the 1950s and following it. So truly, this museum is all about Peggy's spirit, and all the exhibitions that we do here are also very, very closely related to her story. The artists that she exhibited, whose works she collected, the galleries that she had, so all about her entourage of people. And trust me, there are so many stories already that have been told, but yet so many more to be told.
Yeah, I mean, I was telling you earlier, but I might just repeat for any listeners on the podcast. I am such a keen bean, and I read Peggy Guggenheim's autobiography, and I was just feeling like as I came to the building and I knew her process of picking the building, of coming and moving in and going through the whole process of also hanging her collection, and then the different construction works and the parties and even the Alexander Calder bed and all of these things, I just felt like I knew her a little bit. I just felt like this place was a familiar place to me, even though I had never been. And it was so lovely to think about Peggy as a human, as a collector, as a personality. And it was just such a joy to come and also see the collection and the things that she loved, and how she then acquired such wonderful pieces that are now on view here.
Gosh, that sounds wonderful, and I'm so glad that you could really connect with her as such, and this is very important for us. You mentioned the bedhead made by Alexandra Calder, and it was made specifically for Peggy Guggenheim out of silver. And then also in her bedroom, we find not just the bedhead, but the earrings that were made specifically for her by Alexandra Calder again, and Yves Tanguy. So she very famously had worn one of each, one by Tanguy and one by Calder, at the opening of her second gallery, Art of the Century. Exactly, New York, to show her impartiality between abstraction and surrealism. So these are truly symbols of what she was like as a collector. And it's very important for us that visitors can always see them once they come to see her collection.
Yeah, I just absolutely love it. Moving away from Peggy and more onto you, your main areas of research are surrealism, magic, and the occult, which was certainly perfect for your role in curating the current exhibition during the Venice Biennale, titled Surrealism and Magic, Enchanted Modernity. I would love to know more about the process of that. How long was this exhibition in planning, and how did you approach curating it?
Indeed. And I'll relate slightly to your earlier question about how I came here as an intern and how I stayed here. I think the two stories go well together.
Perfect.
So I came as an intern in 2007. Then I worked as an intern coordinator for a couple of years, so really getting to know the entire museum inside out. And afterwards, I was asked to stay as curatorial assistant here by our former director now, and eventually I became associate curator that I'm now today. But during my time as curatorial assistant, I had always been interested in looking at the artworks in Peggy's own collection that are perhaps lesser known, that are perhaps not as often exhibited, that we usually keep in our storage facility. And there was one drawing that I found by Kurt Seligmann, a Swiss-born artist, that was the true expert on magic, in fact, in the movement. And I was so curious to see that I could find almost no information on him, apart from one volume published in Switzerland by the great Swiss art historian Stefan Hauser in the 90s. And I thought, well, why don't I look into him, much more into his story. And eventually he ended up being the subject of my PhD on him and truly the magical ideas, magical characteristics of his art. So my interest in magic and in the occult begins with Kurt Seligmann, and so at the same time begins with Peggy Guggenheim's own collection. And afterwards, of course, I read so very much about all the other artists that Seligmann had known, or that André Breton, the founder of the movement, also had championed, and especially all the women that I think haven't been looked at and haven't been celebrated for all too many years. And this was very and truly the moment to bring them back. Particularly interested in artists like Leonora Carrington, Leonor Fini, Dorothea Tanning. And as you know, Peggy Guggenheim was a true supporter of their art. For instance, she organized the exhibition called The Exhibition by 31 Women in Art of the Century in her gallery in New York in 1943. And it's where she exhibited mostly surrealist artwork, such as those by Fini, Carrington, Tanning, and others. And New York Times on that occasion, in fact, wrote a review of the show saying, well, of course women excel in surrealism, because surrealism is mostly about hysterics. Oh. And so just to say, Peggy was truly believing in their art and pushing, making sure that their careers could progress. And so for me, it was also very much paying a homage to that and remembering that. And the idea for the show was born about sort of 7 years ago.
7 years ago?
7 years ago, indeed.
Wow.
And that was exactly when I had began my PhD at the Courtauld Institute of Art on Kurt Seligmann. And I always thought maybe it would be so interesting to do an actual exhibition, go beyond the academics, beyond all the books and articles that have been written about these artists, because over the past decades, there has been quite a lot of research that has come out. Yeah. But it hasn't manifested in a specific sort of physical exhibition. Yeah. There was a small, wonderful show done in Ithaca at the Johnson Museum at Cornell University in 2014, but our iteration is so much larger and sort of concentrates mainly on sculptures, on paintings, on true objects, rather than mainly ephemera throughout the show. So I also joined forces with another former intern of the Peggy Guggenheim Collection. This is very important to mention. His name is Daniel Zamani, and we kept in touch ever since he did his internship and I did mine, and we always thought maybe it would be lovely to do something together. So he ended up doing his studies in Cambridge and also in his PhD specializing on André Breton and all things occult. And eventually we started talking in late 2017 and said, well, it would be so lovely to do something together, such as the show of Surrealism and Magic. And so we joined forces and in early 2018 started sending out loan requests for this exhibition on Surrealism and Magic. So it truly has been very much going on a scavenger hunt together.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. And that actually segues right into my next question, because the exhibition presents around 60 works from over 40 international museums and private collections. So bringing these together in one space is quite the feat. What are some of the challenges that you faced when curating such an extensive show? I mean, I'm sure loan requests were part of that as well.
I always stress the loan requests. I think in a loan request process, this is the most important thing, to write a good loan request letter, because you have to convince lenders, both public institutions as well as private lenders, that your project is worthy, that it's original, that it's different from everything else that has been done before. And this is truly the only way to convince somebody. And I would know it because we too receive loan requests to our institution. And there are some loans that, get confirmed and others don't. It always depends upon the seriousness of the project, upon the curator, upon the institution. So Daniel and I worked quite a lot on the loan requests. And we not just wrote a description of the project, but immediately concentrated on the reasons why those specific artworks we were requesting was so important for this project, and why without them the exhibition could not take place. And we were very lucky because quite early on we received so many positive replies, and I'm humbled by that because I think people recognize the seriousness of the project. And I think there's also this moment of everybody suddenly realizing this continued relevance of the Surrealist movement. And of course, Peggy Guggenheim being one of the greatest collectors and patrons of Surrealist art. I mean, this fact truly is extremely important. And so it took us a number of years to get the works together. And I didn't just want any painting by Max Ernst or any sculpture by Max Ernst or any Leonor Carrington. I wanted very specific works. So I think by convincing the owners, we managed to get such a wonderful group of paintings together. In Venice, we have about 60 works, as you mentioned. In Potsdam, it will be a slightly larger iteration. They have about 90 works, but only because the spaces are so much larger and they have ceilings that are extremely high, about 5 meters. So there are some works I would have wanted in Venice, but they were just too large to fit into our space, because to tell you the truth, our temporary exhibition space are all former apartments. So they're rather small, teeny tiny, as you have seen.
Yeah, exactly, because I just, prior to recording this podcast episode, I went through the exhibition and the ceilings were not high.
Yes.
We can say the least, yes. But it's a wonderful space. So the exhibition is touring in the Museum Barberini, it's called?
Museum Barberini in Potsdam,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, okay, and there are going to be over 90 works there.
Over 90 works. So in October it's going there. Yeah. And you had asked also about any of the difficulties, right, in organizing this project. Yeah. So funny you should ask that. There was quite a lot of competition, I think, for the loans, because you might know other museums worldwide have also organized Surrealist exhibitions. For instance, there was recently a show on global Surrealism that was presented at the Metropolitan Museum of Art that is now on view at the Tate Gallery. Really such an in-depth look into the global sort of transmission and the global expansion of the Surrealist movement, and so many names to be discovered. So they were, the curators of that project were preparing it around the same time, and there are also a number of other retrospectives for specific artists happening. And also the Biennale, you might know this year, is very much celebrating the female Surrealists. So many of the names that are represented in my own show, Remedio Svaro, Leonor Carrington, Leonor Fini, you name it. So I think the reason that we were successful because we had started also early on, working on the loans years in advance. And another difficulty that we had encountered, and I'm sure other curators must have encountered it too, of course you have all kinds of unpredictable factors that come in. And unfortunately, we had the war in Ukraine starting with this horrific invasion. And for this reason, actually, one of the loans got pulled out of the show because the owners were afraid of the possibility of nuclear war. But as a curator in that instance, you truly can't do anything about it, just because there is no insurance company in the world that will insure you against nuclear war possibility. So there are, I think, some factors one always needs to take into account, unpredictability. But I think in the end we still managed to pull together a strong group of works.
It's so interesting thinking about the context of war with the Surrealists, because they were very much responding to the Second World War with their works and with the groups, and moving from Paris and Italy and the States, you know, going and basically fleeing to the United States from Paris as well. I think it's quite an interesting and also incredibly sad thing that we are feeling today.
I couldn't agree with you more, but actually it relates perfectly with the topic of our show, because as you had seen, the underlying theme in the entire Surrealism and Magic exhibition is that context of war. The fact that some of these artists participated in the First World War, like André Breton worked as a medic, Max Ernst also had to fight in the war. And then many of them indeed had to escape Europe, as you noted, to go to America, Mexico, or other places to save themselves and the movement. And so suddenly you have this group of artists, intellectuals, and writers that believe that logic and rationality fails us, and they need to look for alternative ways to understand themselves and the universe. So this is the reason why they look inwards. Dreams, the irrational, imagination, the unconscious, but also magic and occultation. Because when you translate the word occultus from Latin, it actually means a hidden dimension that is not visible to the human eyes. So in fact, for the Surrealists, our imagination was already a certain kind of magic. And then, of course, they read the writings of Sigmund Freud, who had defined magic as the omnipotence of thought. So stressing that fact that our thoughts and desires and ideas can be strong enough to influence the outer reality. So you can change it for the better. And sometimes when I speak to people who know nothing about Surrealism, they might think, well, these works are a bit scary. I don't understand them. They're like these nightmarish visions coming to life. But the Surrealists believed you actually had to confront those fears that we feel, that sense of angst, not be afraid to do it, to go into an elevated layer of spirituality, so to say, that they called surreality. Yeah. So actually, even if it might not seem this way, it was a rather positive movement. They truly believe they can re-enchant the world at the time of danger. And I think today we are, of course, living with a war happening here in Europe, other global conflicts, the pandemic, the climate change, all the tragedies marking our generation and those on the futures especially. And I think at some point we also all start to feel like surrealists just a little bit. Think about the time we were locked in our homes during the pandemic. There's only for so long that you can look at your computer screen before it starts turning into something else, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that the way that we are responding to that, and the way that the art world is also responding to that, is so incredibly interesting. And I think I personally, thinking about my journey in terms of learning about art and art history as, someone who studied art history and was very interested in various movements, I think that actually through this year's Biennale and through this show, of course it all comes together, the fact that I read the autobiography, but so many things have led to me really finding my way back into falling in love with surrealism, because the first artwork that I ever encountered was a painting by Dalí, and I was like 8 years old. And that was the first time I'd ever really encountered art in that sense, and really it then really registered with me. The first thing I remember about my encounters with art is a painting by Dalí. And so I think that that's something that really can resonate with us all through all the reasons that you just said.
Indeed, I'm very glad to hear this, and I just wanted to add that this movement continues to be relevant, and the artists are relevant because all the themes that are important to us today, like pacifism, being anti-war, saving nature, and sort of taking care, being interested in ecology, all the women's rights, of course, feminism as such, all of this was already extremely important to the artists associated with the Surrealism movement. So I feel they're almost precursors to everything that we're talking about today.
Absolutely. And I'm going to move on to my next question, because we just kind of mentioned the Biennale and the context. And this is a bit of a personal question, but I wanted to ask you about how it feels to curate an exhibition during such an important time. The Biennale brings people from around the world to Venice, and during opening week, all art world eyes were on your exhibition. I mean, of course, not just your exhibition, but the Peggy Guggenheim is one of the most talked about institutions. Did you feel that there was extra pressure when you were putting this together?
Yes, Absolutely. I was quite scared in the beginning, but I think as with everything in life, in this very case too, those moments that seem to be extremely challenging and quite scary, also amazing opportunities. And I think this happened to be exactly the case in this instance too. I was quite scared because for the Venice Biennale, the Arts Biennale, you have so many journalists coming to town, more so than during other periods in Venice. So there was a lot of attention from the media as well. But at the same time, I knew that this is a great opportunity to get people talking about the exhibition, for them to actually see it, so more people would be able to see it than during other periods in Venice. And I have to say, the show has been extremely successful thus far. We've sold out the catalog very quickly within about a period of a month, and then we had to order a second reprint, and I've just heard that we'll have to reprint the English catalog yet again, a third time, because it's been selling out. So yes, lots of pressure, but at the same time, great opportunity, and there's lots of positive energy that comes from this, and adrenaline. But I do have to tell you, having been in Venice now for 15 years, this Venice Biennale opening week has been as busy as ever. Truly, I've never seen anything like that. I think people also are very tired of just looking at their screens, and they very much wanted to reconnect with the real object, to see as much art in person as possible. And this is the reason why we had so many people coming to Venice for the Biennale opening week this time. And we had opened our Surrealism and Magic show just a couple of weeks before that. So we made sure that everybody was able to see that was coming here. But you could really feel that moment of revival and rebirth in the city happening then.
Oh, that's so wonderful. That's so wonderful. I mean, I can't remember who I was speaking to not that long ago. I think I was in Salzburg, and we were talking about how it felt in the city, how it felt with galleries. Oh yes, I was at Gallery Tadeusz Ropak, which I interned there when I was in 2017 when I was a first year at UCL, and so I love to go and speak to the team. But obviously it's August, and this is the main festival season in Salzburg, and they were just saying that, oh my goodness, that it just feels like before. It feels even busier. I mean, there's just so many people, and so many people in the streets, so many people in the gallery. And it's such a lovely, wonderful, beautiful feeling to be able to do that again, because it has indeed been 2 years where we've been in this situation where it's just been something completely different to what we ever thought it would be. I mean, I guess nobody really knew what was going to happen because we've never been through a pandemic before. But I remember I didn't come for the opening, so I was very much having FOMO, looking online and seeing everything going on, and I was like, I have to go this summer and see, because it just looks like the most magical place to be, which suitable.
Magical,
yes.
Truly is the word, the summer in Venice. And I'm so glad you talked about the fact that, you know, we are missing that experience of seeing art again. And we know for sure that nothing can replace the experience of looking at the object in person, you know, through our own eyes, not just through the screen. It gives you a very different experience that way.
It does. Speaking about kind of more career side of things briefly, if someone wanted to follow in your footsteps and one day curate an exhibition at the Peggy Guggenheim during the Venice Biennale, which I think we can all agree is absolutely amazing, what's a piece of advice that you would give them?
Well, the Peggy Guggenheim Collection does consider proposals of exhibitions, and we get quite a few exhibition proposals coming in every year. So if the person, the curator is, you know, a serious scholar, serious curator, and the project is something that could be a good fit specifically for the Peggy Guggenheim Collection and is very much related, as I mentioned before, to Peggy and her story and the artists that she had supported, the proposal will always be considered by our director, and then, you know, you never know. Magic can happen yet again.
Oh my goodness. That's so exciting. I had no idea. That's really wonderful, actually, to offer these opportunities as well for people to submit proposals. Kind of a side question. Yes. Do you know of any other institutions that do it that way, or is this quite specific to the Peggy Guggenheim Collection?
I'm sure other museums do as well. I believe they receive proposals from other possible guest curators and accept some and then reject others. But I think it's just a normal process in museums generally. Yes.
And I actually have just one final question to end the episode. And I love to always ask my guests this to kind of end on a bit of a fun note. If you could pick one artist from art history to have dinner with, who would it be and why?
Gosh, thank you for this question. I think, you know, there are a number of names I could mention. But because we're sticking with surrealism today, and it's all about surrealism and magic, I have to say it is Leonora Carrington. Yeah. I have to say it truly is her. I mean, you had seen the paintings now we have on view in the exhibition, and there's one particular Grandmother Moorhead's aromatic kitchen from 1975, because Carrington really did believe that the kitchen was the most magical space. And so I would love to meet her and talk to her about all that magic taking place in her own kitchen, and truly her sharing the stories that perhaps nobody else knows, and all her interest in witchcraft. I think this is still somewhat of an uncharted territory, not many people know about it. Yes, I would very much love to talk to her and just be in her presence and have her speak to me about her works, even though I know that she would have left her works open to interpretation to the public. But that would be a real treat.
Oh, that sounds absolutely amazing. And that concludes all of my questions in the episode. So, Gražina, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and for taking time to sit down with me and answer my questions. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. It was so kind of you to invite me and talk about all things surrealism and magic. And I hope many more people will come and see the show. So thank you so much for inviting me.
And that is it for today on All About Art. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a rating or a review, as it helps more people discover the show. Also, feel free to share with your friends, or if you share on social media, tag me and get in touch. Thank you so much for listening.